He moved into an abandoned barn with just his dog. Months later, the town couldn't believe their eyes. The hammer rang out in the valley at 3 a.m, sharp and deliberate against the hushed silence of the prairie. Every strike echoed in threes, 3 blows, a pause, 3 more a pause, as if some hidden rhythm guided the man who swung it. Behind a frost-glazed window pane, Clara Knox pressed her face to the cold glass eyes, straining toward the silhouette of the old Whitfield barn. She whispered to herself, "What on earth is he doing out there?" For 5 nights straight, the same unsettling routine had broken the stillness. Folks in the town of Millstone were already whispering. Ever since Elias Mercer appeared 2 months back with nothing but a battered suitcase and a German shepherd named Duke, he had unsettled people's curiosity. He'd paid for the barn in cash old heavy bills that nobody could place and claimed he only needed a roof over his head. But men in need of shelter didn't measure joists with the precision of an engineer, nor did they receive wagons at dawn carrying crates hidden under canvas tarps. Each morning, after those midnight labors, Elias emerged from the barn, looking anything but worn. He walked into town with a posture too confident for someone who claimed to be destitute. His dog padded faithfully beside him, never barking during those eerie work sessions, as if even the animal knew that silence was part of the plan. Some swore they had seen Elias smile at sunrise smile, like a man who carried a secret too large for his frame. It wasn't just his appearance that unsettled people. When Elias had first walked down Main Street, his boots cracked and his clothes threadbare, he seemed like a drifter beaten down by life. But his eyes told a different story. They were steady, almost defiant, as if he were following a map only he could read. Tom Barrett, a young carpenter, eager to prove his skill, had been the first to approach him. Meeting at Parker's General Store. Tom offered to lend a hand with whatever Elias might be building. "I've got tools and strong arms," he said brightly, hoping to make an impression. Elias merely thanked him and declined. His words were polite but firm. "This is something I need to do on my own." That answer puzzled Tom more than if Elias had simply refused. Men, down on their luck, rarely turned away free help, and Elias hadn't turned him away with bitterness. His tone was measured, guarded, almost protective, as though letting anyone in would risk something fragile, something meant to remain unseen. By the end of the second week, Tom wasn't the only one suspicious. At Miller's store, hushed conversations turned sharper when strangers stepped through the door. "Where's he getting the money?" asked old Mr. Wallace over a sack of flour. Those tools of his look brand new. Mrs. Evans lowered her voice as she wrapped her bread order. Maybe he had it before he lost his farm, but Wallace shook his head. Then why claim he's broke, and why work at night like some outlaw? Still, the barn itself began to change in ways no one could deny. The sagging roof was replaced with new beams, the rotten siding stripped and covered with fresh planks, windows cut precisely where none had existed before. What had been a ruin now looked purposeful, yet too purposeful for just shelter. One night, the hammering ceased, suddenly leaving the valley swallowed in silence. Clara Knox, peering out from her window, held her breath. Then a sound carried across the frozen air, a laugh. Not wild or bitter, but quiet, satisfied. It was the laugh of a man who had solved a riddle only he understood. That laugh carried through Clara's bones long after it faded. The next morning, Tom Barrett climbed the ridge overlooking the Whitfield property. What he saw rooted him to the spot. Elias Mercer worked with a rhythm too smooth for chance handling his tools, like an artist rather than a man patching a roof. He didn't look like a drifter at all. He looked like a master craftsman, every movement confident and precise. Tom called out morning, and Elias, without even turning, replied morning. When Elias finally faced him, those unsettling eyes fixed on Tom, and Tom felt as if the man saw straight through him. "Barnes looking good," Tom said, fumbling. Elias nodded once. "Serves its purpose." But Tom wasn't convinced. The windows placed for natural light, the walls thickened for sound, the floor braced to bear heavy weight, none of it made sense for simple lodging. Elias claimed the barn was shelter, but Tom left with his stomach in knots. Shelter didn't look like this. That evening, word spread faster than wind through dry grass. Tom swore the man was building something secret. Clara repeated that laugh she'd heard in the dark. Wallace told anyone who'd listen that he'd seen Elias hauling crates to the railroad station at dawn. And through it all, Duke the shepherd stayed at his master's side, silent and watchful, as though guarding not just a barn, but a treasure. The whispers grew, weaving suspicion into fear. If Elias Mercer had truly lost everything, why did he look like a man who was exactly where he wanted to be? By the third week, Elias Mercer's presence had become the town's favorite puzzle. Every store counter and front porch seemed to hum with theories. Yet the one most unsettled was Tom Barrett. He had seen Elias work with his own eyes, and what he'd witnessed gnawed at him like a splinter under the skin. Tom had grown up around wood. His father ran a modest carpentry shop until illness forced him to retire, and Tom had taken over the small trade. He could spot sloppy work from 50 feet away. But Elias's hands. They moved with a grace Tom had only ever read about in books describing the masters back east. Each cut was clean, each measurement exact, as if Elias were building not a barn, but something that demanded perfection. The town wanted answers, and Tom wanted them most of all. He began finding excuses to pass by the Whitfield property. One morning, while delivering fence rails to a neighbor, he slowed near the ridge. Through the gaps in the siding, he caught a glimpse of what Elias had created inside benches, lined up against walls, tools hung in rows so neat they looked like soldiers on parade planks of wood, stacked by type and size. This wasn't the chaos of a man surviving. It was the order of a man planning. The structure itself was changing in ways no one could ignore. Elias had cut windows at deliberate points, not just for light, but for angle and coverage. The floor had been reinforced with thick beams sturdy enough to carry a weight heavier than livestock. Even the outer walls, layered with fresh boards, seemed designed to muffle sound. No one nearby could quite tell how loud the hammering truly was. It never carried as far as it should have. "Doesn't look like shelter to me," Tom muttered one afternoon, as he watched Elias smooth a joint with a plane, the curl of wood falling in perfect ribbons. He almost stepped forward to ask, but Duke lifted his head at that moment, ears alert, eyes sharp, as if warning Tom to stay his distance. At Parker's General Store, the gossip gained sharper edges. Old Mr. Dugan swore he'd seen Elias loading something heavy into his wagon at dawn, covering it under thick canvas before heading toward the rail line 5 miles away. Clara Knox repeated the sound of laughter she'd heard in the night, a sound that convinced her something unnatural was brewing. And Tom, despite himself, began to wonder if Elias was hiding treasure-smuggling goods or worse. The strange details only fueled suspicion. Elias's tools gleamed too brightly to have been salvaged. His dog wore a collar that looked hand-tooled, lined with small silver studs that flashed in the morning sun. Even the way he moved, confident, deliberate, belied his story of being a man stripped of everything. One late afternoon, Tom gathered his nerve and approached openly. Elias was fitting a window frame, his sleeves rolled back, the muscles in his forearms moving with steady control. Duke lay nearby, dusted with sawdust, head resting on his paws. "You've done all this yourself?" Tom asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Elias didn't look up right away. "Most of it," he said. "Got help with the heavy beams. Must have cost a fortune in lumber," Tom pressed. Elias's hands paused on the wood. His answer came slow, deliberate. "I manage. Nothing more." That was how he always spoke, short, measured replies that explained nothing. Answers that weren't answers at all. And when Tom met his gaze, he felt a flicker of something dangerous beneath the calm. Back in town, Tom recounted every detail. He told Clara about the expensive collar, told Mr. Dugan about the reinforced floor, told anyone who would listen about the careful, exact nature of Elias's work. "It doesn't add up," he insisted. "A man who claims to be broken doesn't work like that. He's hiding something." By nightfall, the story had spread to every corner of Millstone. Men nursed coffee in silence until strangers left, then bent their heads together again. Women at the well lowered their voices, eyes darting toward the ridge. Suspicion thickened into unease, and unease into fear. Meanwhile, Elias continued his strange routine. At night, the hammer fell in its steady rhythm. By dawn, the barn's transformation grew clearer, the skeleton of a great project emerging piece by piece. Inside workbenches stood at perfect height, tools hung in meticulous order, the dirt floor now covered with smooth planks, polished clean. And in the center, something large and unfinished took shape beneath layers of canvas. Elias moved with unshaken certainty, as if every motion followed a plan he had mapped long ago. Duke, ever faithful, sat near the door, a silent sentinel guarding both his master and the secret hidden inside. Tom, watching from the ridge one more time, clenched his fists. "He's not just building shelter," he whispered to himself. "He's building something else entirely. And I'm going to find out what it is." The town had begun with questions, but Tom's quiet vow ensured that before long suspicion would become action. Because in Millstone, secrets never stayed buried for long. Tom Barrett could not let it rest. Each night, the hammering echoed through the valley, and each morning the barn looked more like the workshop of a master than the shelter of a broken man. His curiosity hardened into suspicion, and suspicion into resolve. He would follow Elias Mercer and see for himself what the man was hiding. So, one dawn, long before the sun lifted above the horizon, Tom crouched behind the wide oak tree that overlooked the road to the rail station. Frost bit at his fingers as he waited, his breath forming small clouds in the chill air. Right on cue, Elias appeared with his wagon. Duke perched beside him, ears forward like a sentinel. But the wagon was strangely empty, save for a small wooden crate and a bundle of papers tucked carefully inside. Tom stayed well back, keeping to the tree line as Elias guided the wagon down the dirt road. Each hoofbeat seemed to echo in Tom's chest a drum roll leading toward revelation. The journey stretched 5 miles, yet Tom never lost sight of his quarry. At the station, steam hissed from the iron horse, just rolling in its whistle, cutting through the morning haze. Tom pressed himself against the shadow of a freight building, peering around the corner as Elias approached the station master. Their conversation was quiet, official, punctuated with the rustle of papers. The station master glanced toward the approaching train and nodded. Then the freight car doors slid open and Tom's stomach lurched. Men moved with unusual care, guiding out a long, heavy object. Not a crate of tools, not lumber, a coffin. It was no ordinary coffin. Even from his hiding place, Tom could see the polished wood gleam, the ornate carvings etched deep into the panels. It was the kind of craftsmanship only the wealthy could afford, the kind of final resting place reserved for someone of importance. And Elias Mercer directed its placement onto his wagon with the certainty of a man who had been waiting for this very moment. Tom's pulse hammered in his ears. The midnight labor, the costly tools, the secrecy had all snapped into place with terrible clarity. Elias Mercer had been building a coffin. But why and for whom? Before Tom could think further, another figure stepped down from the passenger car. A woman in a traveling dress posture, erect, her gloved hands clutching a portfolio. She carried herself with the practiced grace of someone from the East, someone who belonged to polished parlors and polished reputations. "Mr. Mercer," she greeted, her tone formal yet warm. Elias inclined his head. "Miss Aldridge, everything is in order." "Exactly as you requested," she replied. "The inscription is complete, though I admit it is unusual for someone to commission his own memorial so far in advance." Tom's mouth went dry. His own memorial. Elias gave a small, measured smile. "I appreciate your discretion. Timing is critical. It must all be ready by tomorrow evening." Tom pressed harder into the wall, his mind racing. Elias Mercer, this man who claimed to have lost everything, was preparing for his own funeral. He wasn't building treasure. He wasn't smuggling goods. He was building his own coffin, his own memorial, and setting a date. By the time Elias secured the casket on his wagon and began the return journey, Tom could barely keep his footing. His thoughts swirled with dread as he stumbled back toward Millston. When he burst into Parker's General Store later that morning, the townsfolk turned at once. Clara, Knox, Jed, Turner, Mr. Dugan all looked up from their coffee. Tom's face was pale, his words tumbling in a rush. "He's got a coffin," Tom gasped. "Custom-made, fine as anything I've ever seen. And it's for himself." The store fell silent. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the stillness. Then Clara spoke, her voice hushed. "But he's healthy as an ox. I saw him lifting beams yesterday." "I'm telling you," Tom insisted. "I heard it myself. He told that woman it was his own memorial. Said it had to be ready for tomorrow evening." Jed Turner set down his mug, hands trembling. "You think he means to take his own life?" The words settled over the room like a death sentence. Faces blanched, eyes darted, the weight of the possibility pressing heavy on every heart. Clara shook her head sharply. "We can't let that happen. Whatever his troubles are, a man doesn't solve them by digging his own grave." But even as they spoke of stopping him, even as fear coiled in their voices, Elias Mercer was already rolling back into the valley, the coffin lashed to his wagon, and Duke standing guard. And inside that barn, beneath canvas and shadows, waited the unfinished project that no one yet understood. When Elias Mercer drove his wagon back into the valley with the coffin secured under canvas, the whispers in Millstone turned into a storm. By evening, nearly every household in town had heard Tom Barrett's account. Elias was planning to bury himself. Tomorrow night, no less. The gossip was not idle chatter anymore. It was fear. Fear that a man they had welcomed, even in suspicion, might end his own life under their very noses. Clara Mason, the school teacher, with more resolve than most of the men in town, stood at the center of the group gathered in Parker's store. "We cannot sit by," she declared, her chin high. "Whatever secrets he carries, he does not deserve to die alone in that barn." Jed Turner, white-haired and stooped with 70 years, nodded grimly. "I'll not watch another soul go down in silence. If he means to harm himself, we'll put a stop to it." So, a small company formed: Clara, Jed, Tom, Barrett, old Doc Morrison, and several others determined to march up to the Whitfield property before tragedy struck. But as they reached the edge of the barn that night, The sound that met their ears was not the hammering they expected. It was voices, low, sharp, unfriendly. Clara raised a hand urging the group into the shadows. Through the gaps in the barn siding, lamplight spilled out, illuminating 3 figures inside. Elias stood near his workbench, shoulders squared, his eyes steady. Across from him loomed 2 strangers, one tall and refined in an expensive coat, the other thick-set scarred knuckles resting near his belt. "You were supposed to be gone by now," the well-dressed man said, his voice cultured yet edged with menace. That was the arrangement. "Plans change," Elias replied evenly. "I've decided to stay." The stranger's lips curled into a cold smile. "That was never part of our bargain. You took the money. You disappear. Forever." From their hiding place, the townsfolk exchanged bewildered glances. What bargain? What money? Elias's voice cut through their confusion. "The payment was for my silence, nothing more. I never agreed to vanish. This town has given me more in 3 months than your world ever did in 20 years. I will not leave." The stranger scoffed. "Life. You call this hiding in a barn a life? You're nothing here, Mercer. Just another drifter, forgotten as quickly as you came." Elias straightened his posture, shifting with a quiet authority none of the townsfolk had ever seen in him before. "My name isn't Mercer," he said firmly, "and I'm not nothing." Even from outside they could feel the weight of those words. 20 years ago, he continued, I witnessed a crime you and your kind buried under lies. I saw the judge's son shoot a man in cold blood. I saw his father sweep the body away, call it an accident, erase the truth with bribes and threats. I carried evidence, photographs, records enough to topple the mighty families of Philadelphia. And because of that, I had to disappear. I lost everything, my business, my name, my future, because I chose survival over war. The heavy-set thug shifted uneasily, his hand brushing the inside of his coat, where a weapon surely waited. But the stranger lifted a hand, cautioning patience. His eyes, however, burned with cold fury. You should have kept running, he said softly. Because now, even without proof, your knowledge makes powerful men nervous. Nervous men are dangerous. Before Elias could reply, Jed Turner made a decision. The old man stepped from the shadows into the doorway, his voice steadier than his bones. I don't think that's going to happen, he declared. The strangers spun toward him, startled. And then Clara Mason, Tom Barrett, Doc Morrison, and the others filed in behind Jed, forming a line of defiance. None of them carried weapons, but their presence was a weapon in itself. Clara spoke clearly, each word like a stake driven into the ground. Seems to me, Mr. Mercer, whatever your name truly is, has found himself a family. And we don't let outsiders threaten our own. For the first time, the well-dressed man faltered. His threats, his wealth, his authority, none of it meant anything here in a barn where neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder. He tried again, smoothing his tone with practiced diplomacy. This is a private matter, nothing that concerns any of you. When someone threatens our neighbor, Clara answered, it concerns us all. The thug shifted again, hand sliding toward his pistol. But Elias Nathaniel Gray, as he had named himself, spoke before the moment could ignite into blood. You misunderstand me, Whitlock. I destroyed the evidence years ago, burned every document, every photograph. I wanted to disappear fully. There is nothing left to expose. For a moment, silence fell. Charles Whitlock's eyes narrowed, searching Nathaniel's face for a lie. The revelation eased some tension, yet the danger lingered. If no evidence remained, why was Elias Nathaniel still alive? Why refuse the bargain to vanish? Nathaniel answered, without being asked, his gaze sweeping over the townsfolk who had risked themselves to stand beside him. Because for the first time in 2 decades, I've found a place I want to stay. A place where a man is measured not by what he's seen or lost, but by what he can build. With that, Nathaniel walked to the shrouded centerpiece in the middle of the barn. With one swift motion, he pulled the canvas away. Gasps filled the air. There, gleaming in the lamplight, was not a coffin, but a dining set table and chairs carved with such intricate beauty it seemed impossible one man alone had crafted them. The wood shimmered smooth as water, the joinery seamless, the detail so fine it looked alive. This, Nathaniel said, voice steady, is my work, my offering to this town. Tomorrow, I meant to auction it to build a workshop here to stop running at last. The barn fell silent as the truth settled over them. He was not building a grave, but a future. Yet Whitlock's eyes narrowed still further, calculating. You could earn a fortune in the cities with skill like that, he murmured. Why waste it here? Nathaniel looked directly at Clara, Jed, Tom, and the others. Because fortune isn't only measured in money. The words hung in the air like a hammer strike, steady and undeniable. But Whitlock was not finished. His companion's hand shifted once more toward his weapon, and this time the wealthy man didn't stop him. The air stretched tight as wire, ready to snap. The barn was so still that even the hiss of the lanterns seemed loud. Charles Whitlock's companion, the thick-set man with scarred knuckles, finally made his move. His hand shot into his coat fingers curling around the polished grip of a revolver. But before he could raise it, Tom Barrett leapt forward with the instinct of a carpenter defending his shop. His hammer swung hard and true, striking the man's wrist with a crack that sent the weapon clattering across the floor. The thug howled, clutching his hand, while old Jed Turner, moving with surprising speed for his 70 years, kicked the revolver toward Doc Morrison, who stooped and scooped it up before the man could recover. The shift was immediate. In a breath, the balance of power had flipped. Clara Mason stepped forward, her voice level and calm as if she were scolding unruly schoolboys. I believe you gentlemen were just leaving. Whitlock's carefully polished composure faltered at last. He looked around the barn at the line of neighbors standing firm, their faces hardened by the kind of resolve frontier life forged into the soul. These were people who had endured storms, drought, blizzards, and loss. They would not be cowed by a silk coat and whispered threats. This isn't over, Whitlock said, though his voice had lost its edge. Yes, Nathaniel Gray replied with quiet finality. It is. He walked toward a wooden crate in the corner of the barn and pulled out a stack of envelopes bound neatly with twine. Holding them up, his eyes never left Whitlock's. These are letters I've been writing for months. Accounts of everything I witnessed 20 years ago, names, dates, descriptions. If anything happens to me or to anyone in this town, these letters will be delivered to newspapers in New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. I've already arranged it with lawyers in 3 different cities. If I vanish, my silence ends. Whitlock paled. His mask of superiority cracked as the weight of Nathaniel's strategy became clear. The man who had been forced into hiding had turned the tables. His very visibility, his connection to this community made him untouchable. You're cleverer than I gave you credit for. Whitlock admitted, his tone colder now, less certain. 20 years of running teaches a man to think ahead, Nathaniel answered. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then Whitlock jerked his chin toward his injured companion. Together, under the watchful eyes of Millstone's townsfolk, they backed out of the barn. Their departure carried no grace, only the bitter recognition of defeat. When the door shut behind them, the barn filled with silence once again. But this time, it was a silence of relief, not dread. Clara looked at Nathaniel, her expression softened by something more than curiosity, respect. "Nathaniel Gray," she said, testing the name as though weighing it on her tongue. "It suits you better than Mercer ever did." He managed a small smile. "I'll answer to either, but yes, I prefer Nathaniel." The following evening, instead of a funeral, Millstone witnessed a celebration. Lanterns lit the main street, families gathered shoulder to shoulder, and Nathaniel unveiled his masterpiece beneath the clear night sky. The dining set gleamed in the lamplight, its polished surface reflecting faces filled with wonder. Every curve, every carved detail spoke not only of skill, but of patience, endurance, and hope. The auction Nathaniel had planned turned into something greater, a public claim of belonging. The table sold for enough money to build the finest workshop the region had ever seen. But more than that, it was a symbolic transaction. The town was not just buying furniture. They were investing in him, acknowledging that Nathaniel Gray was no longer a drifter in their eyes. He was one of them. Tom Barrett became his first apprentice, eager to learn from the man whose hands had turned wood into art. Others soon followed young men who saw not just a trade but a future. Within a year, pieces marked with Nathaniel Gray's name found their way to homes as far as Denver and St. Louis. Yet Nathaniel never again left Millstone. Every evening he sat on the porch of the modest house he built beside his workshop. Duke lay faithfully at his feet, his muzzle gray now, but his eyes still watchful. Together they watched the sun sink behind the hills, the sky painted with fire and gold. The townsfolk who had once whispered suspicion now greeted him with warm nods and open doors. Clara Mason often brought her students to his workshop, letting them run their hands over the smooth wood to feel what patience could create. Jed Turner visited often, too, always claiming he just wanted to sit a while, though everyone knew he came to marvel at how a man could carve beauty out of what once looked like ruin. Nathaniel Gray. Once a man on the run, once thought a stranger hiding secrets in an old barn had finally stopped running. He had built something lasting, not just of wood, but of trust, respect, and belonging. Life has a way of testing us in silence in the shadows where no one sees the hammer strikes at 3 a.m. Nathaniel Gray's story reminds us that a man's worth is not measured by the wealth he hides nor the mistakes he flees from, but by what he chooses to build for others. In Millstone, a community, once suspicious, found itself bound together not by fear, but by loyalty and courage. They proved that families can be chosen, not just born. And Nathaniel proved that redemption comes not from escaping the past, but from shaping the future. So, if you take anything from this tale, let it be this. Your legacy isn't what you hide. It's what you create, what you give, and who stands with you when it matters most. If this story moved, you share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because stories of courage, redemption, and the power of community are ones worth telling and worth remembering.